Hi, Sam from Guitar Village here, and today we've got a cool challenge. So Tom, our cameraman, has come up with this great idea. He said, wouldn't it be fun if I gave you some lucky dips to choose from? You've got to choose a genre, a budget, and a curveball. We'll figure out the curveball in a minute, but let's focus on genre and budget. And you've got to go out into the shop and kind of build a rig based on these two things. Now, the last draw we've got here is curveball. So what that means is, once I've figured out what genre I'm looking for and how much I've got to spend, the curveball might say that you have to spend 70% on, say, the guitar and 30% on an amp, or it must include a guitar made in the UK, or it must include 2 pedals, something like that. Anyway, just to show you what we've got in here, so we have a kind of lucky dip setup. It's kind of a lucky dip guitar safari. We're thinking of making this into a series, so we may call it that, but if you've got any better suggestions, do put them in the comments below. So you can see each of these, we've got 10 lucky dips in each of the drawer. I don't know what we're going to be choosing. So the genres, you've got kind of all your typical stuff in there. You've got blues, metal, rock, that kind of stuff. Budget goes from £300 all the way up to £10,000. So we could be having a lot of fun if we get the right one. And the curveball, like I said before, it's just something to throw this whole thing out. Well, enough chat from me. Let's start digging into these and see what we get. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Anyways, back to the video. First up, let's see what genre we get. So let's have a little stir around of these nicely folded cards Tom's made up for us. Even branded them Guitar Village too. Okay, so the first one. What's this going to be? Ooh, a fun one. We've got punk. Okay, so punk is our genre. Let's see how much money we've got to spend. I mean, this one, I think we could actually, you could go so far either way with this. Okay. Come on, £10,000. We need to spend £10,000 on a punk rig. Oh, not a bad budget either. £2,500. I'm sure we can build a decent punk rig for that. But the curveball, this is the bit that could completely throw it. So I have no idea what's on any of these, by the way. The only ones I knew was kind of roughly the genres and the budgets we were working between. But let's see what this curveball says. Okay, so this one is vintage demand. As you can see there, it says something vintage, pre-owned if you're really struggling. So we're going to try and get a vintage guitar setup. I don't know if that includes the amp as well, or the leads. Everything has to be vintage. Maybe we could kind of mix and match and see if I get told off. Well, I've got the budget, I've got the genre, we've got our curveball in there. Let's get out into the shop and choose some stuff. Right, so I'm armed with these cards. We're in the shop. Let's have a look around and see what we can buy with the money. So this is our kind of first electric room. I've got a few ideas of things I'm thinking of. Initially, as I grew up listening to a lot of the pop punk stuff, like your Blink 182s and your Green Days, you know, it's all sort of Strats, Les Paul Juniors. Those were my first sort of ideas. I think because everything in here is sort of getting up to £1,000, there might be something, but I want to pop upstairs first and see what else there might be. You know, as I've got a bit older, I've kind of started to appreciate a bit more of the Sex Pistols, so I was also thinking possibly something like a Les Paul Custom, but there's tons of ideas, so it's just difficult to know where to start. And because it has to be pre-owned, it has to be pre-owned, but preferably vintage, I think it's going to make it difficult. I mean, it's not vintage, but it's pre-owned. Something like that Melody Maker, you know, it's not a Les Paul Junior, but come on, it's pretty close. And we've got to consider the amp as well. Now, actually, while we're out here, I'm going to go new amp, I think, because we're not massive, you know, in terms of stocking vintage pre-owned amp. So I'm thinking maybe Marshall Black Star might fit the bill. I mean, this wouldn't be a bad option. The design store white Marshall, I think that thing looks great, but maybe even a Vox. I think Voxes sound great in a band setting. But let's go in the pre-owned room and see what we've got. There's a couple of things that I think might work really well. As I said, Les Paul Custom, so if we've got something like that, you know, we have just if you have a look behind you, we've got that great Orville Les Paul Custom. I mean, that's £1,500. It's a big chunk of the budget. If we were going to go a little bit cheaper, something like the Ibanez Blazer there, which is very cool, nice 80s guitar. So there's a couple of good options. So guitar-wise, probably one of those. Amp-wise, maybe to go with it. It really depends if, I mean, Tom hasn't given me, you know, a really tight brief on this, so I don't know if it's going to be like a home setup, it's going to be a gigging setup, but maybe something like the DSL 40. I mean, that's a killer amp, and that is 700 quid. So that paired up with the Orville, I mean, that's pretty much our budget. So yeah, let's head on down with those two and see how they sound. So we're back in the cellar again. I've got these two hooked up, and actually just after a quick noodle on this Orville, this thing is really killer. 1,500 quid. I mean, for a Les Paul custom type guitar, if you're not going to buy a Gibson, buy this one, because this thing is absolutely incredible. The amp's not bad either. Just on spec alone, having, you know, like an all valve amp, it's 40 watts, so it's loud enough to gig. You've got a clean channel, a crunch channel, two types of high gain on there, which they call the ultra gain. You know, full EQ, treble, middle, bass, presence, resonance. You've got reverb in there as well, and two master volumes, which is foot switchable. I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And the standby switch has a high and low setting, so you can drop the wattage down too. Right, that's enough waffle about the amp. Back to the guitar. So, like I said, I've just been kind of noodling around on this, and this thing sounds absolutely great. For this sort of playing example, you know, doing the punky stuff, generally I'd probably just go for the bridge pickup. I'd want, you know, a clean sound and then a high gain sound, which this amp, you know, can deliver. So let's have a go and see how it sounds. First up then, clean channel. Quite nice. I mean, I've got it set just as sort of, you know, the gain's at 50% on there, so you could go a bit cleaner with it, but I kind of like the sort of edge of breakup sound. So when you dig in, you can just hear a little bit of hair on there. Now let's go over to the high gain channel and see how that sounds. It's not bad either. I mean, I did spend a little bit of time dialing in, but I mean, pretty much, you know, the EQ's set fairly flat on there, a bit more emphasis on the bass, but yeah, I really like that. Now, this was this was £1,500. The amp was £700. So we spent £2,200. I mean, not including a lead and stuff. If you want to factor that in, that's up to you, but you know, not a bad setup. £2,200. So that kind of leaves us 300 quid. So let's check out some pedals to go with it as well. Okay, so we're at the counter. This is where we keep all our pedals. So I'm kind of going to go for two pedals, I think. I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I want to go for a delay. I think they're really useful, you know, for some of the melody lines in punk and things like that. If you want to do octaves, they just, you know, make it sound really good. And, you know, since we're on, it's not a limited budget, but £300 these days doesn't get you quite as much with pedals. So I'm thinking something like a Tube Screamer Super Overdrive type thing. And as we've got one right in front of me, let's go for a Boss Super Overdrive. And for the delay, let's keep it all Boss. Let's go for the DD3. It's an absolute classic. You know, and those two combined is kind of getting us near where we need to be. Plus, you're more than likely going to need something like a pedal tuner as well, and possibly a power supply, so you don't have to keep spending money out on batteries. So let's get those two out and have a play with them. Okay, once again, we are back in the cellar again, and I've got a couple of pedals here, the ones we picked out, the two Boss pedals. Now, the reason I went for Boss is because they just seem to be built like bricks. I mean, you know, with punk music, you're going to be, presumably anyway, you're going to be out, you're going to be chucking your guitar around, and you know, you're going to be stomping on these things. It's going to be a rowdy audience, and Boss pedals just seem to last forever. So I think they're a really good option. And you know, the DD3 and the SD1 are absolute classics. We're going to get these things wired up. Now, if you're going to run these things, you're most likely going to want to run it into the SD1 first, your overdrive, and then into the delay pedal, so that will come afterwards. That way, kind of keeps the delays a little bit cleaner sounding. Anyway, let's hook this thing up and see how it sounds. Okay, so we've got these Boss pedals plugged in. Let's start with the delay pedal first, see how that sounds. Turn that thing on. I think that's too long a delay. Let's play around with it. So that was on the long setting, the L, 800 milliseconds. Let's go to the medium one. That is 200 milliseconds. Okay, it's a bit rockabilly. Let's see if we can mess with that one, make the time a bit longer. Okay, that's not too bad. It's kind of getting there. That's the one. It's sort of a bit of a... Yeah, I think I like that one. That one sounds pretty good. I think that will just enhance some of the lines a bit nicer. One thing to mention actually at this point, if you are running a delay, as I said earlier, you want to put it after the super overdrive, but maybe if you're running the gain on the Marshall, you might want to put it through the effects loop at the back of the amp. But, you know, for this, I think this would be fun just to play around with. Now, let's check out the super overdrive. This actually, I think, will work better on the gain channel there, because I think this is going to work well if we just trim the drive amount back and boost the volume on the pedal itself, maybe a bit at the top end. So let's go to the drive channel. Nice, so you can just hear having that in there, it just pushes the front end of the amp a bit more into even kind of higher gain. And I think it adds a little bit more definition to each note as well, and maybe a bit more fullness too. So if you're doing lead lines, the super overdrive is going to work great for that, you know, all those kind of octavey bits and things like that. Yeah, I mean, for £2,500, I mean, this setup's not bad. I think once you factor in the leads and things like that on top, patch leads, power supply, it's going to be pretty much spot on for that budget. And yeah, this whole setup I think works really well. Okay, so after giving this stuff a really good thorough test, I think it's probably self-evident that I'm not a punk player, but, you know, did some kind of punky bits that sounded just about right. One thing I haven't mentioned actually is this rig, you know, we put this together so I had to choose, you know, a punk thing that's kind of with a vintage guitar, at £2,500 to spend, but maybe you're not into punk, but you want, you know, a decent rig. And I'll be honest, this actually could work for a lot of different genres. I think you get away with, you know, rock, metal, blues, all that kind of stuff. This thing will absolutely handle that, especially with a great Les Paul Custom like this too. Now, if you want to check out any of the gear we used in today's videos, it will be linked in the description below. And like I said earlier, we're hoping to do a few more of these, make a bit of a series of it. So if you can think of a good name you think we should use for it, instead of just kind of Lucky Dip Guitar Safari, then put it in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.